The sun dipped low over the vast expanse of the Wyoming plains, casting a golden hue that shimmered like forgotten dreams on the earth. Dust stirred beneath the hooves of a weary horse as Silas McAllister, a giant of a man with shoulders broadened by years of toil, rode into the small station town of Lone Willow. The air was thick with the scent of hay and the distant tang of copper from the nearby river, a reminder of the life that pulsed stubbornly like the heart of a prairie flower, even in the grip of drought. Silas's eyes, however, were clouded by shadows of his own making, remnants of a past that haunted him like specters in the midnight hour. He dismounted and tied his horse to the rail, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel as he approached the platform. There was an unease in the air, a silent communication among the townsfolk who cast curious glances at the towering figure. Silas had grown accustomed to such scrutiny. His hulking size and the scars etched on his hands told stories that needed nothing more than a glance to understand. Yet behind his stoic demeanor lay a heart burdened by loss. The echoes of laughter once shared, now a distant memory, swallowed by tragedy. He had come seeking solace, but the loneliness loomed larger than any mountain. It was then that he saw her, a flicker of movement in the fading light. A woman swayed slightly at the edge of the platform, her delicate frame wrapped in a faded shawl, her eyes obscured by the dark glasses that marked her as vulnerable. The townsfolk murmured amongst themselves, some in pity, others in disdain. Silas felt the weight of their gaze, but found himself drawn to her like a moth to a flame. She stood there alone, a silhouette against the twilight, exuding a quiet strength that made his heart ache in unexpected ways. As he approached, she turned her head slightly, as if sensing the presence of someone who might protect her. "Is someone there?" Her voice, though soft, carried a firmness that resonated with his own unspoken resolve. Silas cleared his throat, searching for the right words through the fog of his own tangled emotions. "I'm here to help," he finally said, his voice a low rumble grounded in sincerity. The woman's brow furrowed, and for a fleeting moment he saw a flicker of fear cross her features, swiftly replaced by an unyielding determination. Without hesitation, he extended a large hand toward her, his palm open and inviting. "You're coming with me," he offered, a simple command laced with uncharacteristic tenderness. He felt the weight of her hesitation, and in that quiet standoff, the world around them fell away. The whispers of the townsfolk faded into an indistinct hum, and the prairie wind wrapped around them like a protective shroud. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his, and in that fleeting contact, both felt the pull of something greater, a connection forged in shared isolation. As Silas guided her away from the station, he could sense the shift in the air, a moment suspended in time. This journey, though unexpected, felt like a reckoning, a chance to mend fractured souls in a world that had turned its back on them. The sun dipped further, casting long shadows across the path ahead. Yet in that gathering dusk, Silas found an unexpected glimmer of hope. Perhaps together they could forge a new future amid the ruins of their pasts, finding shelter in each other against the relentless winds of fate. As Silas led the woman away from the station, the air thickened with unspoken words, each step echoing the unsteady rhythm of their entwined fates. She walked beside him, the sound of her soft footfalls barely disturbing the stillness that enveloped the desolate plains. Silas stole glances at her, intrigued by the way her shawl fluttered in the evening breeze, the fabric whispering secrets of lives once lived. With each stride, he felt a peculiar warmth spreading through him, a spark within the cold cavern of his heart, long buried by grief. Her name was Clara, a moniker he would learn only later, yet it resonated in his mind like a distant melody. He noted the way she carried herself, not with the timidness one might expect from a blind woman, but with a sense of purpose. Her chin held high as if she could see the mountains painted against the horizon. Silas could feel the tension in her slender form, the clenched fists hidden beneath the folds of her shawl, and he wished he could ease the burden of uncertainty resting on her shoulders. They walked in silence, the only sounds a faint rustling of grass and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead, its shadow gliding across the earth like a fleeting promise. As they made their way toward his modest homestead, a wooden structure that blended almost seamlessly into the landscape, the sun continued its descent, casting a burnished glow upon the world. The house, weathered and worn, stood defiantly against the elements, a beacon of stability in a world rife with chaos. Silas could already picture the small kitchen where he would rustle up a meal, or the sturdy table where they could share stories, should she be willing to unveil the depths of her own silence. For now, he simply sought to provide a refuge, a sanctuary from the judgmental eyes of the townsfolk who thrived on gossip like weeds in the wild. Once inside, the stale air greeted them, a stark contrast to the coolness of the evening. Silas moved about the space, lighting a lantern that flickered to life, casting soft shadows that danced along the faded walls, adorned with remnants of a life once filled with laughter. Clara stood just inside the door, her senses attuned to the unfamiliar surroundings. He caught the shift in her posture, the way her breath hitched slightly as she took in the scents of aged wood and lingering smoke. "This is it," he said, his voice low, hoping to instill a sense of comfort in her heart. "Do you have anywhere to sleep?" she asked, the firmness of her inquiry surprising him. Silas paused, momentarily taken aback by her directness. "You can have the bedroom. It's small, but it's clean," he replied, his eyes softening as he considered the profound vulnerability in her request. He stepped closer, conscious of the space between them, allowing her to feel his presence without overwhelming her. "I have your back, Clara. I won't let anyone hurt you." In that moment, he witnessed the interplay of uncertainty and resolve wash across her face. She nodded slowly, absorbing the words, yet he could see the flicker of vulnerability still present behind her dark glasses. Silas took a breath, aware that their journey would be fraught with challenges and healing alike. Together, in this modest shelter, he hoped they would learn to navigate the shadows of their pasts, forging a bond unbreakable in the face of a world that often turned away from the broken and the lost. The wind howled outside, a haunting reminder of the storms they both carried. Yet within these walls, perhaps they could create a haven of shared resilience and quiet strength. The lantern's flame flickered gently, illuminating the small kitchen where remnants of Silas's solitary meals lay strewn about. He busied himself preparing a simple feast, beans simmering in a pot and cornbread barely rising in the cast-iron skillet. The soft crackle of the fire mingled with the rhythmic drumming of his heart, a low thrum that echoed the anticipation building in the air. Clara stood still, her fingers tracing the contours of the worn table as though trying to map a landscape of memories that evaded her sight. Silas could sense the tension radiating from her, thick and palpable, and for a moment he paused in his task, watching her navigate the space with a mix of apprehension and quiet strength. "Can I help?" she asked softly, the question breaking the silence like a sparrow's song in the stillness. It took him by surprise, the willingness to engage, to participate despite the veil of darkness that hung over her world. He turned to meet her where she stood, her chin held high, the strength in her stance a stark contrast to the vulnerability he had observed moments before. "You can set the table if you'd like," he offered, grateful for her eagerness to join him in this small act of normalcy. Clara stepped forward, her movements deliberate yet fluid, as she began to feel for the mismatched dishes and cutlery. Silas watched as her hands moved with grace and purpose, an unseen rhythm guiding her. The awkwardness of their initial connection began to dissolve, replaced by the simple dance of two souls seeking a sense of belonging. As she placed the utensils down, her fingers brushed against his. A jolt surged through him, an unspoken recognition of shared solitude. He felt a warmth spread, blooming like the prairie after a long-awaited rain. When the meal was finally ready, Silas set 2 plates at the table, the steam curling into the air like wisps of forgotten dreams. The comforting scents enveloped them both, and for a moment the weight of their pasts felt lighter, almost bearable. He sat across from Clara, their gazes meeting briefly before both looked down at their plates. In that charged silence, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were transgressing the borders of mere survival, inching towards something deeper, more profound, a burgeoning kinship forged in the fires of isolation. As they ate, Silas's gaze flickered to Clara, studying the way she savored each bite, her brow furrowed in concentration. He marveled at the resilience that clung to her, the way she navigated the world without sight yet with a clarity of spirit he admired. They exchanged few words, preferring the comfort of shared silence, yet each moment deepened the connection that began to unfurl between them. The heaviness of loneliness that had once filled the room with a palpable ache seemed to recede, replaced by a fragile sense of understanding and compassion. Unspoken, yet vivid in the air, they both breathed. After they finished eating, Silas rose to clean the dishes, but Clara pressed her hands against the table, her voice firm and resolute once more. "Let me help you," she insisted, and despite the instinct to shield her from the mundane tasks of life, he found himself relenting. Together, they washed the plates in rhythmic synchronization, the sound of water splashing and the gentle clinking of ceramic becoming a quiet symphony surrounding them. In those simple exchanges, Silas discovered the depth of compassion he had long denied himself, a realization that perhaps this unexpected companionship was not merely an act of shelter, but a lifeline thrown to both of them. As the last dish was set aside, the warmth of the fire flickered through the room, casting shadows that danced like echoes of the past they both sought to escape. Silas turned to Clara, eyes meeting hers. The moment hung suspended in time, rich with promise and uncharted territory. The silence enveloped them, a sacred space where vulnerability intertwined with courage, and he felt an overwhelming urge to reach across the table to bridge the chasm of their solitary existences. Yet instead, he remained rooted in place, an anchor in this storm of uncertainty, aware that the real work lay ahead. They had crossed an invisible line into something new, a sacred pact formed amid the ruins of their former lives, with the possibility of healing and hope lingering in the space between them like a soft glow in the twilight. As the night deepened, the shadows lengthened, curling around Silas and Clara like a thick blanket. The lantern's flickering light cast a warm glow, illuminating the contours of their newly shared space. Silas busied himself by the hearth, stoking the fire, fingers brushing against the cool wood of the mantel, feeling the grain beneath his calloused touch. Each ember sparked with the tension that buzzed silently within the room, a tension that mirrored the weight of unsaid words hanging in the air. Clara's presence was a soothing balm, yet he could sense the uncertainty that lingered just beneath her composed exterior. Clara's hands found their way to her shawl, pulling its fabric tighter around her shoulders, a subtle shield against the encroaching chill of the night. Silas caught the movement from the corner of his eye, a flicker of vulnerability that tugged at something deep in his chest. He paused, stilling himself, the hearth's warmth crackling softly in the silence. Her shadow danced along the walls like a ghost of the past, reminding him of the lives that had crossed his path, leaving only echoes behind. In this moment, he felt raw, exposed, and for the first time in years, a sliver of something akin to fear crept in. Fear of the connection that was forming, yet also a hopeful yearning for something more. "Tell me about where you came from," Clara ventured softly, breaking the silence that had settled like dew on the prairie grass. Her voice was steady, Yet he sensed the depth of her curiosity lurking beneath. Silas's throat tightened, memories of his past swirling like dust in the evening air, swirling into a tempest that threatened to engulf him. He hesitated, the words catching like barbs on his tongue. "It's just a place," he finally replied, each syllable heavy with gravitas, unwilling to fully divulge the scars etched into his soul. "Places are often more than just locations," Clara replied, her voice unwavering. The conviction in her words struck a chord within him, resonating with the weight of unspoken truths that had been locked away. He turned to face her, searching for the right balance between honesty and self-preservation. Clara's dark glasses reflected the flickering light, hiding her eyes, but not the intensity of her gaze. In her stillness, there was a gentleness that made it impossible for him to retreat further. Silas took a deep breath, the air thick with a mixture of fear and resolve, the space between them charged with an electric, unspoken understanding. "I lost my family to the drought. The land took everything from us," he finally confessed, the words tumbling over one another as if escaping a dam long held tight. He felt the fissures in his heart crack open, revealing remnants of grief that still lingered like smoke after a fire. Clara listened intently, absorbing his words as he revealed the vulnerability that had become his constant companion. The tension shifted as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough surface of the table, seeking connection in a world that often felt isolating. "Loss is a heavy burden to bear," Clara said softly, her empathy echoing in the stillness. For a moment, the weight of their respective histories hung between them, raw and unfiltered. Silas felt the terrible loneliness that had long been his only companion lessen slightly, as if in sharing their wounds, they could find some solace from the chaos outside. Clara lifted her chin, the strength of her spirit illuminating the room more than the lantern ever could. The air around them was heavy with unspoken promises, the fragile hope of healing mingling with the reality they both faced. Silas met her gaze, and in that exchange he understood that they were no longer mere survivors moving through the world alone. They were two souls, drawn together by a thread of fate, both seeking refuge from the storms of their pasts. As he held her gaze, a spark of determination ignited within him, a promise not just to be her protector, but perhaps to allow himself to be saved in the process. In that small, weather-worn house, with the night wrapping them in an embrace of shared resilience, an uncharted journey began to unfold. A journey toward healing, empowerment, and the possibility of a future woven together in the tapestry of their intertwined lives. The wind howled outside, a restless spirit echoing the turmoil within, as Silas and Clara settled into the uneasy rhythm of their shared solitude. Silas busied himself at the hearth, the flicker of the flames casting paintings of light and shadow across the rough-hewn walls. Each crackle and pop felt like an invitation into something tender and uncertain, an unspoken acknowledgement of the new bond that had begun to form between them. Clara's presence was both a comfort and a challenge, a reminder that to heal, one must allow another to glimpse the wounds that lay beneath the surface. Clara had retreated to the fringes of her own thoughts, her fingers tracing the grain of the table as if mapping out a path toward their newly forged connection. Silas caught her lost look, a trace of something deeper reflecting behind her dark glasses. The silence wrapped around them like a thick fog, heavy with the weight of unshared stories and the lingering shadows of their pasts. A silence that would not be easily broken. He felt the urge to fill the void with idle chatter, yet something in him urged restraint, as if the quietude between them was a sacred space they were both learning to inhabit. "Do you want me to show you around?" Silas ventured, his voice low but steady, breaking the stillness as he gestured slightly toward the door, the intimacy of the offer hanging in the air. Clara turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable, but beneath the layers of uncertainty, he detected a flicker of curiosity. "I'd like that," she replied softly, the words spilling forth with an unexpected brightness that seemed to lighten the atmosphere. With a nod, Silas moved to guide her towards the small living area, allowing her to lead with her senses rather than rely on the sight that was denied her. He felt the tension in her body, the hesitance that came with unfamiliarity, and with each careful step, he remained attuned to her needs. Clara's fingers brushed against the wall, exploring the contours of a life that had existed just beyond her reach. While Silas remained close, his presence a gentle reassurance as she navigated her new reality. He felt as if he were walking a tightrope, balancing the desire to protect her with the need to let her explore, a precarious dance between vulnerability and strength. The lines between savior and saved began to blur, and with each whisper of the wind outside, Silas could sense the deepening trust that was beginning to weave its way between them. In the corner of the room sat an old rocking chair, its wood polished from years of use. Clara's fingers brushed against its surface, and she paused. "It feels familiar," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Silas took a step closer, the words unspooling from his heart before he could think to stop them. "My mother used to sit there, rocking me to sleep when the nights grew long," he confessed, the weight of nostalgia lingering between them. Clara turned her head toward him, and though he could not see her eyes, he felt the intensity of her gaze piercing through the darkness that separated them. "Memories can be both a comfort and a burden," Clara replied, her tone imbued with the wisdom of someone who had also carried her share of sorrow. Silas nodded, feeling the warmth of her understanding wash over him, mingling with the cool shadows that still lingered in the corners of his heart. In that moment, he sensed something shift within her, a shared recognition of their unique battles. The barrier that had once separated their experiences began to dissolve, replaced by the fragile threads of connection woven through shared silence and mutual understanding. As they stood there, amidst the fading light of the lanterns, Silas felt an overwhelming need to protect not just her body, but her spirit, to shelter her from the doubts and fears that threatened to overwhelm them both. Clara, too, began to reveal the strength that lay buried beneath her vulnerability, an unyielding spirit that resonated in the silent spaces they occupied together. The night stretched on, and in the embrace of their shared uncertainties, a flicker of hope ignited, a promise of healing, a quiet understanding that neither was truly alone. In the darkness, they found a light within each other, a glimmer that whispered of a new beginning waiting to unfold just beyond the horizon. The moon hung high in the velvety sky, casting a soft glow over Silas's homestead as night deepened its hold on the world. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the sense of wood smoke and remnants of their shared meal, creating a cocoon of warmth against the chill outside. Clara's presence had transformed the old wooden structure into something more than just a refuge. It felt alive, pulsing with a tentative but undeniable energy, a promise, perhaps, of companionship born from the shared weight of their burdens. Silas stood by the hearth, the cooling embers echoing the dwindling flicker of hope he had long buried, now reigniting in response to Clara's quiet strength. As the silence enveloped them, Clara's fingers danced over the surface of the table, tracing the grain with a familiarity that belied her blindness. Silas watched her, a tender longing stirring within him, as he wished he could banish the shadows lurking in her heart, as he sought to shield her from the world outside. Yet in the midst of their shared solitude, something within Clara shifted, an unspoken invitation that pulled him closer. She turned her head in his direction, and despite the barriers of sight, there was a profound awareness radiating from her. Silas felt the tether of their connection tighten, a gentle call to bridge the last gap between them. "Would you like to hear a story?" Clara's voice broke through the quiet, soft, yet laced with an earnestness that caught Silas off guard. The question hung suspended in the air, charged with possibility. Silas blinked, surprised by the offer, for he had expected her to shy away from vulnerability. Instead, her invitation resonated with a sincerity that stirred something deep within him. Slowly, he nodded, the simple act carrying the weight of a deeper promise that he would, perhaps for the first time in years, allow himself to be seen. "Once upon a time, there was a giant who lived among the stars," Clara began, her voice flowing like the gentle breeze outside, weaving a tapestry of imagination that mirrored their shared reality. Silas leaned against the mantel, his heart swelling as she painted the story with deft strokes. She spoke of loneliness and strength, of finding solace in quiet moments, and of the giant's journey to find his place in a world that felt too small. As she spoke, Silas closed his eyes, allowing her words to envelop him like a warm embrace, each syllable a reminder that they were not alone. He listened intently, the rhythm of her voice grounding him in this sacred space they had carved out together. When Clara finished her tale, he opened his eyes to find her gaze directed toward him, even without sight, and in that moment he felt the air shift. An unseen current surged between them, rich with the shared understanding of their struggles. It was a transformative gesture, her willingness to bare her soul through a story, to infuse their silence with meaning, and in doing so, she had reached through the darkness and pulled him closer into the light. Silas felt the walls he had built around his heart ease, the cracks widening as hope flooded in. A hope ignited not only by her presence, but by the acknowledgement that vulnerability could be a bridge rather than a chasm. With newfound courage, Silas stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking as if pulled by invisible threads of fate. "Tell me more," he urged softly, his voice charged with an unfamiliar warmth, a steadiness that laid bare his desire to share his own history. Together, they embarked on a journey not just of words, but of connection, their stories weaving into the fabric of the night. As they spoke, the flickering lantern light danced shadows across their faces, illuminating the unvarnished truth of their lives, two souls entwined in their respective quests for solace, finally allowing the healing power of vulnerability to seep into the cracks of their pasts. As the hours slipped away, each story, each shared silence, began to stitch together the remnants of their fractured lives. The air between them was charged, thick with the possibility of healing and the promise of a future woven not from loneliness, but from the shared recognition of their humanity. Outside, the wind continued its restless howl, but within the modest walls of the homestead, Silas and Clara discovered that they were no longer just lost souls wandering the vast empty plains. They were companions embarking on a journey toward restoration, daring to envision a life that embraced both pain and joy. The lantern flickered softly as Silas and Clara shared stories, weaving a tapestry of their pasts into the fabric of the present. Laughter bubbled lightly between them, the sound melting the heavy silence that had previously enveloped the room. But beneath the comfort of their exchange, shadows loomed, intangible yet palpable, whispering of pain long held at bay. As laughter faded into the night, Silas felt the weight of unspoken truths pressing against the walls of his heart, a heavy burden that demanded release. Clara, with her keen intuition, sensed the shift in the air. She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her empty plate, as though seeking a lifeline in the familiar contours. "What's on your mind, Silas?" she asked gently, the softness of her voice cutting through the building tension. He hesitated, swallowing hard, the memories clawing to the surface like a long-buried storm. Her inquiry was a doorway, an opening into the dark corners of his heart that he had been too afraid to explore. Slowly, Silas pushed himself away from the mantel, the weight of his past crashing down like a tide. He moved to the window, the cool night air brushing against his face, grounding him as he gazed out into the vast expanse of the Wyoming plains. "I lost my youngest brother to the drought," he began, his voice low and gravelly, the words scraping against the raw edges of his memory. He could still see the sun-scorched earth, the weary horses grazing on parched grass, and the way his brother's laughter once filled the air with light. He paused, feeling the ache in his chest deepen, the landscape outside a haunting reminder of what had been lost. "I was supposed to protect him," he continued, the confession wrapping around him like a shroud. "When the dust storms rolled in, I thought I could shield him from it all. But the land, it took him, along with every ounce of joy I had." He turned away from the window, eyes locked onto Clara, who listened with an intensity that drew him deeper into the well of his pain. Each word felt like a release, an offering of the sorrow that had anchored him in solitude, a fragment of his past woven into the present moment. For years, I wondered if I could have done something differently. What if I had taken him away from that cursed place? What if I had stayed by his side instead of seeking shelter in my own denial? Clara's breath caught in her throat, the vulnerability in his voice stirring her own buried fears. She reached out, her fingers grazing the edge of the table where the lantern cast flickering shadows. "You did what you could," she said softly, a quiet strength in her words. "We can't control the storms. Sometimes we're left with nothing but the echoes of what once was." The weight of her understanding enveloped him, a tender balm against the wounds he had laid bare. In that moment, he recognized a mirror of loss reflected in her own eyes, a connection that surged through the space between them. Silas took a breath, feeling the tension in his chest ease ever so slightly. "I came here seeking solitude, not wanting the world to see the ghost of my brother," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But here you are, and I sense that perhaps I've been hiding from more than just the pain." Clara nodded, the silence that followed heavy with recognition. It was a profound acknowledgement of their shared isolation, two souls tethered together by their scars, both learning that perhaps they could find refuge in each other. As the lantern flickered, casting shadows that intertwined like the threads of their stories, Silas felt a transformative clarity wash over him. The burdens he had carried were beginning to loosen their grip, softened by the understanding that sharing one's pain could open the door to healing. Silas turned back to Clara, the vulnerability now held within a fragile hope, a realization that with each shared secret, they were building something new amid the remnants of their respective pasts, a sanctuary forged in their willingness both to confront their fears and to embrace the promise of tomorrow. As the night deepened, Silas and Clara settled into the sanctuary of shared stories. Yet beneath the warmth of their connection, an undercurrent of uncertainty began to weave its way into their fragile bond. Silas, still grappling with the memories of loss, found himself wrestling with an inexplicable fear. The closer he grew to her, the more he felt the pull of his old burdens, wounds that had never fully healed now at risk of reopening. Clara, too, bore the weight of her own past, and Silas could sense her tentative grasp on the courage needed to navigate this new reality. In the glow of the lantern, shadows danced between them, blurring the lines of their newly formed relationship. One evening, the air thick with tension, Silas stepped outside to gather wood for the fire, seeking solace in the cool night. The stars twinkled overhead, reminders of the vastness of the world, while the stillness of the night offered a balm for his restless spirit. He leaned against the wooden rail of the porch, wrestling with the dawning realization that he had begun to care for Clara in ways he hadn't anticipated. Yet, as warmth swirled in his chest, the old fear clawed back, whispering doubts about the fragility of their connection. What if he was only a momentary refuge for her, just a fleeting shelter against the storms she faced? The thought gnawed at him, casting shadows across the burgeoning hope that had filled the void of his heart. Unbeknownst to him, Clara stood just inside the doorway, her dark glasses reflecting the flickering light of the lantern. She sensed the shift in Silas, the way his shoulders stiffened, the tension that coursed through his body like a startled deer ready to bolt. With a resolve that surprised even herself, Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding with both apprehension and determination. "Silas!" she called out, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. But the giant cowboy remained still, lost in thought, as if the weight of his burdens had drawn a barrier between them. The air crackled with unspoken words, the space between them thickening with the silence that often accompanied misunderstanding. He turned slowly, finally meeting her tentative gaze, and for a brief moment the world around them fell away. But the silence lingered, a reminder of the misunderstandings waiting to unravel. "I can't help but feel like I'm burdening you," Clara said softly, the vulnerability in her tone cutting through the stillness. Silas stepped forward, searching for the right words, but they evaded him, dancing just beyond reach. A flicker of hurt crossed her features as she continued, "You took me in when I was lost, and yet I feel like I'm only a weight on your shoulders." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Silas's heart clenched at her words. He felt anger rise, a protective instinct emerging in the face of her self-doubt. "You're not a burden, Clara," he insisted, his voice rising slightly as the emotions bubbled to the surface. "You think sheltering you is a weight? I've been carrying grief for too long, and you—" He paused, struggling to rein in the rush of feelings. "You've brought light back into this place. I didn't expect that." The admission felt raw and unfinished, yet it lingered in the air, waiting for her response. Clara's breath hitched, and for a moment the light in her presence dimmed. The connection they had forged turned tenuous, fraught with confusion. "I didn't mean to," she stumbled, her voice faltering. "I wanted to be here, but I don't want to take anything away from you." Her words trembled as they slipped from her lips, and Silas felt the distance between them widen, the shadows of doubt creeping in once more. They stood on the threshold of misunderstanding, each wrestling with their own fears, unsure of how to navigate the churning waters of vulnerability that had begun to swell between them, threatening to pull them apart. In the quiet of the night, their thoughts collided, leaving them both adrift in the complexity of their emotions. The lantern flickered behind Clara, casting elongated shadows that mirrored the turmoil inside. Silas wanted to reach out, to bridge the divide, but the weight of unexpressed fears clung to him, like the dust of the plains. Both were acutely aware that they had wandered into a realm of uncharted territory, one that promised refuge, yet whispered of the potential for heartbreak. Amidst the stars above, the night stretched on, echoing with the silent plea for understanding as they faced the depths of their own vulnerabilities, both yearning to speak, yet hesitating, caught in the delicate dance of their burgeoning connection. The wind picked up, a restless howl that echoed through the plains, carrying with it the scent of rain mingled with the acrid dust of the drought-stricken earth. Silas stood at the edge of the porch, heart pounding like the hooves of a galloping horse, sensing that the tension between him and Clara was about to be punctuated by something far more dangerous than their unspoken fears. The atmosphere crackled, fraught with an impending storm that felt ominous, as if nature mirrored the turmoil brewing within their hearts. Clara stood framed in the doorway, her silhouette trembling against the flickering lantern light, her gentle courage at odds with the swelling winds beyond. Just as Clara opened her mouth to speak, a distant rumble echoed through the air, resonating like the growl of some great beast. Silas glanced over his shoulder, instincts flaring as he scanned the horizon. A dark mass loomed, clouds swirling like a tempest. A storm was approaching. Yet it wasn't the approaching weather that unsettled him. It was the shadow of unease that crept into the depths of his gut. The plains had been merciless before, ripping lives away without a trace. And in this moment, he felt a primal urge to protect Clara from more than just the elements. "Get inside," he commanded, his voice low and gravelly, the authority of a man who had learned too well the harsh realities of survival. Clara didn't question him but stepped back, instinctively moving toward the safety of the home. Silas followed, every instinct on high alert as he shut the door firmly behind them, the sound echoing in the silence that enveloped the room. With the heavy wooden door now shielding them from the impending storm, his mind raced, contemplating the new dangers that might approach with it. But before he could voice his concerns, The world outside erupted. A thunderous crack of lightning, followed by a chilling roar of thunder that rattled the very foundation of the house. Clara jumped slightly, her eyes widening beneath the dark frames of her glasses. Silas could feel the tension in her body, a reflection of his own rising anxiety. "It's just the storm," he reassured her, but the weight of his words felt hollow against the intensity of the growing cacophony outside. The wind howled, rattling the shutters like urgent hands seeking entry, and Silas couldn't shake the prickling sensation that something more sinister lurked just beyond the veil of the storm. They had run from their pasts, but now, as the winds roared, it seemed as if the specters of his and Clara's history had arrived, ready to reclaim them in a grasp of fear. Suddenly, a sharp sound shattered the tension. The unmistakable crack of a gunshot reverberated across the plain, echoing through the night air like a death knell. Silas's heart sank, a visceral response igniting a fire within him, an instinctive recognition that danger had breached the safety of their haven. He turned to Clara, the color draining from her face as panic set in. "Stay here," he ordered, the resolve in his voice brokering no argument. Silas stepped toward the door, muscles tense, prepared to confront whatever threat had dared to intrude upon their fragile sanctuary. Outside, the winds howled mercilessly, swirling dust and debris like angry spirits. Silas stepped into the chaos, scanning the horizon for the source of the gunfire. His mind raced through possibilities, bandits, a desperate soul seeking release in violence. But as the sound of another shot rang out, closer this time, a fierce determination surged through him. He had already lost too much. He wouldn't let this stranger's recklessness take Clara away from him. The rain began to fall in heavy sheets, drenching the earth and creating a rhythm that mirrored his thundering heart. As he peered through the swirling sheets of rain, he braced himself for the storm that was not just brewing in the skies, but rising with primal ferocity in the heart of the plains. With the tension palpable in the air, Silas prepared himself for a confrontation, knowing that the tempest outside mirrored the fragile sanctuary within. Clara's safety depended on him now. He could either retreat into the shadows of his own fears, or rise to face the darkness that threatened to engulf them both. The storm raged outside, a symphony of chaos that rattled the walls of Silas's homestead. Rain lashed against the windows, each drop a reminder of the turmoil that had intruded upon their fragile peace. Silas stood at the threshold, heart pounding, his gaze fixed on the tumultuous horizon. The gunfire still echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder of the dangers that lurked beyond the safety of their shelter. He could feel Clara's presence behind him, a quiet strength that anchored him amidst the storm's fury. Though silence enveloped them, it was laden with unspoken promises, a shared loyalty forged in the crucible of their respective vulnerabilities. Clara lingered in the shadows of the home, awareness coiling tightly within her chest. The darkness outside mirrored the uncertainty that lay just beneath the surface of her heart. She felt the weight of Silas's presence, his sturdy frame a bulwark against the chaos. In that moment, the sound of thunder rolled overhead, sending a shiver down her spine. And for a brief instant, Clara feared the storm was a harbinger of the past they both sought to escape. Yet as she listened to Silas's steady breaths, she was reminded that they stood together, not as broken souls adrift in a vast, cruel world, but as allies bound by a quiet determination to confront whatever life hurled their way. With a deep breath, Silas turned back toward Clara, the flickering light of the lantern casting a warm glow that softened the edges of her silhouette. In the dim light, he caught a glimpse of the resolve shining in her dark glasses, a flicker of loyalty that stirred something deep within him. The connection they had begun to forge felt more potent than all the storms that threatened to tear them apart. In that charged silence, Silas reached out, the gesture instinctive and uncalculated, guided by the unyielding desire to offer reassurance. Clara stepped closer, her fingers brushing against his, and in that brief, electrifying moment of contact, They found solace in each other's presence, transcending the chaotic world outside. The rain continued its relentless assault, but within those four walls, they created a sanctuary, a refuge forged in the act of standing together against the storm. Silas could feel the warmth of Clara's hand in his, a comforting reminder that despite the dangers lurking beyond the door, they were united in their resolve. A harrowing thunderclap echoed through the air, and Clara instinctively leaned toward him, her body seeking the safety of his solidity. Silas's heart surged, the weight of responsibility mingling with a powerful surge of protectiveness. Here was someone he would fight for, someone who had unwittingly drawn him out of his self-imposed isolation. Not a word passed between them, yet the silence was rich, charged with shared understanding. The world outside may have been chaos, but together they cultivated a fragile hope amid the onslaught. Silas could feel the tension wavering in Clara's frame, a testament to her own courage in the face of uncertainty. It was a dance of vulnerability and strength, a testament to the unyielding bond that was forming, a bond that would weather the fiercest gales and stand firm in the face of despair. Together, they were not merely surviving, they were carving out a space for healing, a shared mission to reclaim their lives from the shadows that had once threatened to engulf them. As the rain continued to fall, like a relentless tide, Silas began to feel the storm within calm, soothed by the unwavering presence of the woman who had so unexpectedly slipped into his life. He realized that amid the chaos, they were not just two souls seeking shelter. They had become something more, a team poised to confront the darkness, side by side. In this moment, the storm was no longer just an external threat, but a backdrop to their shared resilience. Together, they had found a steadying force in one another, silently promising to face whatever came next, their loyalty forged in the crucible of the night. In the silence between thunder and rain, they stood together, two lonely souls bound by loyalty and an unspoken vow to protect one another. And as the winds howled outside, a fierce tempest that mirrored their internal struggles, Silas and Clara held fast to the fragile hope that flickered between them, a delicate flame in a world too often shadowed in darkness. Together, they embraced the storm, ready to confront whatever lay ahead, steadfast in their resolve to find warmth amidst the chill. The storm raged outside, rain hammering against the wooden walls of Silas's homestead like a relentless army. Inside, as the turbulent winds whipped and howled, the tension that had lingered between Silas and Clara began to unravel. They stood together, a fragile alliance built on shared adversity and mutual respect, the flickering lantern illuminating the contours of their faces. After the thunder had faded to a distant growl, Silas took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. There was a truth buried deep within him, a whisper of the past that demanded to be revealed. "Clara," he began, his voice steady but low, cutting through the oppressive silence that enveloped them. The vulnerability he sensed in her only deepened his resolve. "I need to tell you why I came to these plains. Not just to escape the land, but to escape myself." He glanced toward the window, the rain casting a silvery veil over the world outside, and for a moment, the weight of his burden felt heavier than ever. "Long ago, before the drought took my family, I had a life, one filled with laughter, love, and the easy warmth of home." His gaze softened as he recalled the echoes of children's laughter and the fading scent of fresh-baked bread that once filled the air. In the dim light, Clara remained still, her fingers intertwined, the tension in her body hinting at a peculiar mix of fear and curiosity. Silas sensed her breath, slow and measured, as she awaited the rest of his story. "We were a large family," he continued, forcing the words past the tightening knot in his throat. "My brother, my parents. We each had our roles, our dreams. I was supposed to be the protector, the one who shielded them from harm. But when the first winds of drought swept through our homestead, I couldn't bear the weight of it. I ran away." Each word felt like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of regret through the quiet space between them. He could see Clara's brow furrow slightly, her fingers tightening around themselves as if bracing against the storm threatening to breach the dam of her own emotions. "But you came back," she urged gently, her voice a lifeline, seeking to anchor him amid the tide of memories. Silas let out a low breath, nodding slowly, gratitude swelling in his chest. "I did, but by then it was too late. The land had taken what was most precious, leaving behind nothing but shadows." The weight of the past hung heavy in the air, and he took a moment to gather himself, the rawness of his memories still sharp enough to wound. With every unguarded heartbeat, Silas felt the distance between them narrow until the walls around his heart began to crumble. "I came to understand that my cowardice didn't just cost me my family, but it brought me to a place of isolation, a desolation much like this damn land," he confessed, his eyes catching Clara's in a moment that felt charged with understanding. "But here you are, Clara, standing in the ruins of my past, and I find myself drawn to you, so much so that it terrifies me." A soft flicker of vulnerability danced across Clara's features, the truth of his words echoing in the silence, reverberating like the thunder that still rolled in the distance. In that swirling tempest of emotion, Silas reached across the table, his hand finding hers, a gentle, steadying presence against the storm outside. Clara didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hand, her warm touch igniting a spark in the chill enveloping them. Their connection deepened, born from the ashes of loss and the hidden promise of healing. Together they stood on the precipice of vulnerability, each unraveling the secrets that had bound them to secrecy for far too long. In this moment, the storm lost its bite as they found in each other the strength to reshape their destinies, remnants of lost dreams mingling with the flickering embers of hope shared between two weary souls. The storm, once a howling tempest outside, had settled into a mournful drizzle by the early hours of the morning, the soft patter of rain against the roof, an echo of the tumultuous night. Silas sat at the small kitchen table, the remnants of their last meal scattered about, a half-eaten plate of cornbread, a steaming pot of beans left to cool. Clara stood by the window, her fingers lightly tracing the condensation on the glass, the world outside obscured by a veil of water. In the stillness of the room, Silas felt a quiet dread creeping in, a sense that the fragile peace they had nurtured was teetering on the edge of uncertainty. The night had stitched together fragments of their pasts, weaving a tapestry of shared pain and glimmers of hope. But now, as dawn crept slowly across the horizon, Silas's heart was heavy with the knowledge that the tempest outside mirrored the storms brewing within Clara. He could sense her unease, the way her frame seemed to tighten with each passing moment, weighed down by the unspoken fears that loomed between them. She had opened her heart to him, and now the vulnerability that had forged their bond hung precariously in the air, fragile as a spider's web, glistening with morning dew. "Silas!" Clara's voice broke the silence, low and tremulous, pulling him from his haunting thoughts. She turned slightly toward him, her brow creased, the tension palpable. "Do you think they'll come looking for me?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the threat of shadows that had chased her from her past. Silas felt the weight of her fear pressing against him, a reminder that the sanctuary they had found was not impervious to the world outside. He stood, moving to her side, the warmth of his presence a stabilizing anchor. "I won't let anyone take you away." The promise hung between them, spoken with unwavering certainty, yet the tremor in his voice betrayed the uncertainty that rattled the bones of his own resolve. Clara turned to him, her dark glasses catching the morning light, and he reached out, brushing his fingers against hers in a gesture that felt both protective and tender. The bond they had forged these past weeks shimmered with the unbreakable strength of shared vulnerability. Yet he could feel the storm clouds gathering once more, a reminder that safety was not yet theirs to claim. As they moved about the house, Silas busied himself with chores, trying to distract both Clara and himself from the encroaching threat. Outside, the sun began to peek through the heavy clouds, casting a golden light that illuminated the sodden earth. But even as the world outside awakened, an ominous stillness settled in the air, thickening with the unvoiced worry that hung like a dense fog. Each sound became amplified. The creaking floorboards, the distant call of birds returning, the wind stirring the remnants of the night. Silas felt a tremor run through him, a primal instinct that told him their sanctuary might soon be tested. As afternoon approached, a sudden jarring knock echoed through the small homestead, each rap against the door slicing through the fragile tranquility they had cultivated. Clara's breath caught in her throat, and Silas's heart raced as he exchanged a quick glance with her. "Stay here," he warned, the low rumble of his voice carrying the gravity of the moment. But Clara was already stepping forward, her instinct to confront the unknown overriding the urgency of his command. "No," Silas urged again, stepping in front of her, but the tension in the air crackled with her defiance. "I will not hide," Clara declared, her voice low but unwavering. Silas felt a rush of admiration swell within him, mingled with a fierce protectiveness that surged in response. "We face this together," she insisted, her hand pressing against his, grounding them in the uncertainty of the moment. With a heavy heart, Silas nodded, realizing that together they had become more than just survivors. They had become a force against the uncertainties looming outside. As he reached for the door, uncertain of what awaited them, the storm swirling beyond the threshold felt less like an impending threat and more like a testament to the resilience forged in the crucible of their shared struggles. Whatever lay on the other side, he knew they would face it together, their bond now a beacon against the chaos beyond. The heavy knock resounded through the wooden walls, each thud reverberating deep within Silas, echoing the apprehension that had settled in the pit of his stomach. He opened the door slowly, each creak of the hinges fraught with anticipation. Outside, the heavy clouds had begun to dissipate, yielding the remnants of the storm to a fragile afternoon light that painted the land in muted shades of gold and shadow. Silas braced himself against the frame, his heart racing, not just from the unexpected visitors, but from the weight of Clara's presence behind him, a steady anchor in the stormy seas of uncertainty. 3 figures stood on the porch, drenched but unyielding, faces hardened by the elements and the lives they had lived. The leader, a tall man with a weather-beaten face and a hard gaze, stepped forward, his intention clear but unspoken. Silas felt Clara's breath hitch behind him, and he turned slightly, catching her eye before facing the men once more. The unspoken bond they had formed in the sanctuary of the homestead gave him strength. He was no longer just a man burdened by his past, but a protector willing to shield the light in his life from the shadows outside. "Is she here?" the leader asked, his voice gravelly, carrying with it the weight of an accusation. Silas's jaw tightened as the words hung in the air. He straightened his posture, an unyielding wall between Clara and the man who sought to disrupt their fragile peace. "She's safe here, away from you," he replied, the low timbre of his voice steady but laced with the heat of defiance. He could feel Clara's silent strength behind him, as if her very presence fortified his resolve. In that moment, he understood the depth of their connection. 2 souls intertwined by shared pain, standing firm against the harsh realities that sought to tear them apart. The man's eyes narrowed, searching Silas's expression for the flicker of doubt that might betray him. "We're just trying to help her," he finally said, though the words sounded rehearsed and insincere. Silas shook his head, the calmness in his chest stirring into resolve. "Help or control? You've already taken enough from her." Clara stepped slightly forward, the urgency in her posture reflecting the silent plea for her autonomy. "I don't want to go back," she said, her voice firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. The 3 men exchanged glances, surprise evident in their hardened features. In that charged moment, Clara's strength illuminated the room. Silas felt his heart swell with admiration, watching as she stood confidently amidst the tempest in her own right. It was a declaration of independence, an assertion that her fate was not to be dictated by others, but to be forged by her own will. The men began to shift, visibly uncertain now, but Silas stood unwavering before them, a shield defending the light from the darkness, threatening to encroach. "Do you really think you can take her away again?" Silas challenged, voice steady, the tone resonating with a quiet intensity that echoed through the damp air. The leader hesitated, the bravado draining from him as he registered the palpable bond forged between Silas and Clara, a bond that had risen from shared wounds and fierce resilience. Realization dawned on him as he took a step back, recognizing that they were not merely adversaries, but partners in healing, a camaraderie too profound to sever easily. With that, Silas closed the door against the encroaching darkness, the finality of the sound reverberating through the house, a promise made, a sanctuary protected. As Silas turned from the door, the room fell silent, the atmosphere thick with a fragile hope. He felt Clara's presence at his side, the warmth of her hand resting against his arm, grounding him in the victory they had just claimed. Emotions swirled within him, a sense of purpose ignited by the storm they had weathered together. In the quiet aftermath, he allowed himself the grace to breathe, the burdens of his past beginning to lift, their shared trust blooming brighter than ever. Together they stood in the sanctuary they had created in the aftermath of the storm, resilient, unwavering, and forever changed. The morning light broke through the receding clouds, casting a soft golden glow over the Wyoming plains. Silas stood at the small kitchen window, the remnants of the storm dropping softly against the earth. He inhaled deeply, the air heavy with the mingling sense of fresh rain and damp earth, a reminder of renewal amid the chaos they had endured. Behind him, Clara moved about the modest space, her movements fluid as she navigated the contours of their home, a sense of cautious optimism beginning to bloom in the air between them. Each gentle touch she traced across the table, the walls, even the floor became a reaffirmation of her presence, a testament to the resilience that had brought them to this moment. Silas turned his gaze from the window, the sight of Clara igniting a warmth deep within him. She stood by the hearth, fingers brushing the warm stones, absorbed in the simple act of reacquainting herself with the sanctuary they had forged in the wake of the storm. He could see the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips, a subtle shift in her demeanor that breathed life into the stillness of the morning. The weight of their shared experience hung between them, yet it was no longer a burden. It had become a foundation for something new, something hopeful. Silas stepped closer, instinctively matching her movements, their energies harmonizing in the soft morning light. "Do you want to help me prepare breakfast?" he asked, his voice low but filled with warmth. Clara turned to him, a glimmer of uncertainty flickering in her eyes, but quickly replaced by resolve. "I would like that," she replied, her voice steady as she stepped toward him. As they moved about the kitchen together, the once silent space filled with the sounds of clattering dishes and the soft crackle of the fire igniting in the hearth. Silas found comfort in the ease of their rhythm. Every shared task felt like a step toward rebuilding not just the home, but their lives entwined in the aftermath of fear. In the midst of breakfast preparations, they exchanged the simplest of glances, each one a thread weaving their hearts closer together. Silas watched Clara as she poured water into a pot, her brow furrowed in concentration. He felt a swell of affection, noticing her quiet determination. In that moment, he saw not just a woman who had been rescued, but one who had become a beacon of hope, illuminating the dark corners of his own soul. As the beans simmered and the cornbread baked, he realized that they were no longer just two survivors living in the shadow of their pasts. They were architects of a new beginning, constructing a life designed together. The aroma of breakfast filled the air, wrapping around them like a warm embrace, and as they finally settled together at the table, Silas felt a sense of belonging wash over him that he had thought lost forever. They sat side by side, sharing the meal, their fingers occasionally brushing against each other, the contact sparking quiet warmth. Between bites, they spoke of dreams and hopes, the conversation flowing freely, unburdened by the weight of their histories. Silas shared stories of his family, and Clara spoke of the places she yearned to see, the mountains she longed to touch and feel, each word a promise of what could be. As dawn broke fully outside, bathing the landscape in light, Silas gazed out the window at the expanse of the plains, now glistening under the sun's tender gaze. There was beauty in the world around them, an affirmation that the storms could pass. Silas turned his head back toward Clara, finding her eyes bright and alive, reflecting the same light that now illuminated their home. In that moment, he felt a quiet resolve settle within him, a promise to nurture this fragile bond, to protect the light between them as they ventured into the unknown. Their journey was no longer laden with despair. It was a hopeful new beginning, a testament to resilience, forged in love and anchored in shared understanding.